I was born to kneel, to scrub, to disappear into the walls of grand houses that would never bear my name. But the day I found 30 million pounds worth of jewels hidden beneath the velvet seat of an old carriage, I understood that fate had written a different story for me, one that would change not only my life, but the life of the coldest man I had ever known. My name is Helena Ashford, and I was 23 years old when I arrived at Thornwood Hall in the autumn of 1882. The estate rose from the Somerset Hills like a monument to another age, its gray stone facade softened by centuries of ivy and the amber light of October afternoons. I had come from a modest household in Bristol, where my mother had served as a seamstress until her fingers grew too stiff with age, and my father had worked the docks until the sea claimed him one December night when I was barely 15. I remember standing at the servants' entrance on my first day, my small leather bag clutched against my chest, watching the chimneys release their thin ribbons of smoke into the pale sky. The housekeeper, Mrs. Pemberton, had interviewed me in London 2 weeks prior, and her letter of acceptance had arrived like a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. I had been dismissed from my previous position after the lady of the house accused me of stealing a silver thimble, a thimble I had never touched, a thimble that was later found beneath her own vanity cushion. But by then, my reputation had been stained, and no apology could wash it clean. Thornwood Hall promised a fresh beginning. The estate was vast, the staff numerous enough that I might lose myself among them, and the master, I was told, rarely descended from his private quarters to trouble the servants with his presence. The master, the Duke of Ashworth, Lord Sebastian Hartwell. I did not meet him on my first day, nor on my second. For an entire week, I polished silver and beat carpets and learned the rhythms of a house that seemed to breathe with its own ancient life, and still the Duke remained a rumor, a shadow that passed behind closed doors, a name spoken in whispers by the other maids. The servants' quarters were located in the east wing of the house, a warren of small rooms connected by narrow corridors that smelled of lye soap and candle wax. My room was at the end of the corridor, barely large enough to hold a bed, a washstand, and a small chest for my belongings. The window looked out over the kitchen garden, and in those early days I would lie awake at night listening to the wind move through the herbs, carrying scents of rosemary and thyme into my cramped quarters. It was Clara, the kitchen maid with copper hair and a tongue too quick for her own good, who first told me about the Duke. We were folding linens in the upstairs corridor, the late afternoon sun streaming through the tall windows, and she leaned close enough that I could smell the flour on her apron. "He is handsome," she said, in that way that makes you afraid to look at him directly, like staring into the sun. "But cold, Helena. So terribly cold. They say his heart froze the day his mother died, and nothing has thawed it since." I asked when his mother had passed, and Clara shrugged, her nimble fingers never pausing in their work. 10 years ago, perhaps more. He was barely 20 then, and his father followed her to the grave within the year. Some say it was grief, others say it was guilt. The old Duke was not a kind man, not to his wife, not to his son. And now Sebastian carries the weight of this house alone, with nothing but debts and silence for company. I tucked this knowledge away as I tucked the linens into the cabinet, neat and orderly, betraying nothing of my curiosity. I had learned long ago that curiosity was a luxury servants could not afford. We were meant to be invisible, to move through rooms without disturbing the air, to witness everything and remember nothing. But I have never been skilled at forgetting. Clara continued her whispered history as we moved through the upper floors, dusting and arranging and performing the countless small tasks that kept a great house breathing. She told me about Lady Margaret, the Duke's mother, who had been beautiful and fragile and desperately unhappy. She told me about the old Duke, whose temper was legendary and whose cruelty was spoken of only in the darkest corners of the servants' hall. She told me about the years after their deaths, When Sebastian had dismissed half the staff and closed entire wings of the house, retreating into solitude like a wounded animal seeking its den. "He never entertains," Clara said. "Never attends the parties in London. The great families have given up inviting him. They call him the ghost of Thornwood, you know. A title with no future, an estate with no heir." I asked why he had never married, and Clara laughed, a sharp sound that echoed off the paneled walls. "Who would have him? Oh, the fortune hunters tried, in the early days. Young ladies with more ambition than sense. But he turned them all away. They say he cannot love, that his father beat it out of him before he was old enough to understand what love meant." I thought about this as I worked, about a man so wounded that he had sealed himself away from all human connection. I knew something of that impulse. After my father died, I had built walls of my own, walls that kept the world at a safe distance, walls that protected me from the kind of loss that had nearly destroyed me at 15. But walls, I had learned, were both protection and prison. They kept pain out, but they also kept joy at bay, and a life without joy was not really living at all. My first encounter with the Duke came on a rain-soaked evening in late October. I had been assigned to clean the library, a cavernous room lined with leather-bound books that smelled of dust and tobacco and something faintly sweet, like dried roses. The fire had burned low, and I was kneeling before the hearth, coaxing the embers back to life when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned, and there he was. Clara had been right. He was handsome in that way that makes you afraid to look directly, all sharp angles and dark eyes and a mouth that seemed carved from marble. His hair was black as ink, pushed back from a forehead that bore the faint lines of perpetual thought. He wore no jacket, only a white shirt with sleeves rolled to his elbows, and I noticed that his hands were stained with ink, as though he had been writing for hours. He looked at me the way one might look at a piece of furniture that had been moved without permission. "Who are you?" he asked, and his voice was low, roughened by disuse. I rose to my feet and curtsied, keeping my eyes on the carpet. "Helena Ashford." "Your Grace." "I am new to the household." He said nothing for a long moment. I could feel his gaze on me, measuring, assessing, and I forced myself to remain still, to breathe slowly, to become the invisible thing I was meant to be. The fire crackled behind me, and somewhere in the depths of the house a clock struck the hour, its chimes muffled by distance and stone walls. "The fire needs more wood," he said at last. "See to it." "Yes, Your Grace." He moved past me to the window, where the rain streaked the glass like tears, and I understood that I had been dismissed. I added wood to the fire, arranged the tools on their stand, and slipped from the room without another word. That night, lying in my narrow bed in the servants' quarters, I could not stop thinking about his eyes. They were the color of winter storms, gray and deep and impossibly sad. I had seen grief before, had worn it like a second skin after my father died, and I recognized it in the Duke as surely as I recognized my own reflection. But there was something else there too, something harder, something that had calcified around his heart like a shell. I told myself it was not my concern. I told myself that men like him existed in a world I could never enter, that the distance between a maid and a duke was as vast as the distance between earth and stars. I told myself many things that autumn, and I believed none of them. The weeks passed, and I settled into the rhythm of Thornwood Hall. I learned which floorboards creaked beneath my feet, which doors stuck in their frames during damp weather, which corridors caught the afternoon light in ways that made the dust motes dance like tiny constellations. I learned the preferences of Mrs. Pemberton, who demanded perfection in all things, and the temperament of Mr. Hughes, the butler, whose stern exterior concealed a surprising fondness for the stray cats that gathered at the kitchen door each evening. And I learned, slowly, the geography of the Duke's days. He rose early, often before the sun, and took his breakfast alone in his study. He spent his mornings with ledgers and letters, wrestling with the financial burdens that had plagued the estate for years. In the afternoons, he rode out across the hills, returning mud-spattered and windswept, as though he had been trying to outrun something that lived inside him. In the evenings, he retreated to the library, where he read until the candles burned down to stubs and the fire collapsed into ash. He spoke to no one unless necessity demanded it. He entertained no guests, attended no gatherings, answered no invitations. The great ballroom on the east wing had been closed for a decade, its chandeliers shrouded in cloth, its mirrors reflecting nothing but darkness and the occasional beam of light that snuck through the shuttered windows. "It is a tomb," Clara said one evening as we prepared the upstairs bedrooms for their weekly airing. "This whole house is a tomb, and he is its ghost." I did not argue with her, but privately, I thought she was wrong. Ghosts do not feel pain, and I had seen pain in the Duke's eyes, pain that was very much alive. November brought the first frosts, painting the lawns white each morning and turning the breath of the horses to silver clouds. I had been at Thornwood for 6 weeks when Mrs. Pemberton summoned me to her sitting room, a cramped but tidy space adjacent to the kitchen where she managed the household accounts. She was a woman of perhaps 50, with iron gray hair and a face that revealed nothing, and I had learned to approach her with the same caution one might approach an unpredictable mare. "Helena," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. "Sit." I sat, folding my hands in my lap and keeping my expression carefully neutral. "You have been with us for 6 weeks now, and I have received no complaints. This is unusual. Most new maids require at least 3 reprimands before they learn the standards of this house." I was not certain whether this was praise or suspicion, so I said nothing. "The Duke has ordered a clearing of the old carriage house," she continued, pulling a ledger toward her and making a notation. "There are several vehicles stored there that have not been used in decades. Some will be sold, others will be repaired for service. I am assigning you to prepare them for inspection." "Yes, Mrs. Pemberton." She fixed me with a long look, her pale eyes sharp beneath heavy brows. "The carriage house has not been properly cleaned since the old Duchess passed. Lady Edwina, God rest her soul, was very particular about those carriages. They were her pride and joy. But His Grace has determined that sentiment cannot pay debts, and so they must go." I understood then why she had chosen me for this task. It was a test, perhaps, or a punishment disguised as an opportunity. The old carriage house was far from the main building, isolated, forgotten. A lazy maid might spend her days there doing nothing, and no one would be the wiser. A diligent maid would work alone, without supervision, and prove her worth. I intended to prove my worth. "The collector is offering £5, Mrs. Pemberton added, her voice flat with disapproval. £5 for a carriage that once carried the Duchess to Buckingham Palace itself. But His Grace says the past is worth nothing if it cannot pay the present's debts." There was bitterness in her tone, and I wondered how long she had served the Hartwell family, how many changes she had witnessed, how many treasures she had seen sold to satisfy creditors. But I did not ask. Such questions were not for servants to pose. The carriage house stood at the edge of the estate, down a gravel path that wound through a grove of bare oak trees. Their branches reached toward the sky like skeletal fingers, and the fallen leaves crunched beneath my feet as I walked, the sound unnaturally loud in the morning stillness. The building itself was handsome, built of the same gray stone as the main hall, with wide wooden doors that groaned when I pushed them open for the first time. The hinges were rusted from years of disuse, and I had to put my shoulder against the wood to force them apart. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the smell of old leather and straw. Pale light filtered through high windows, illuminating the shapes of carriages draped in canvas covers, like sleeping giants waiting to be awakened. There were 6 vehicles in total, ranging from a small gig suitable for country drives to an elaborate landau that must have been magnificent in its day. But it was the carriage in the far corner that drew my attention. Even beneath its cover, I could sense its importance. It was larger than the others, more ornate. And when I lifted the edge of the canvas, I caught a glimpse of gilded trim and royal blue velvet. I pulled the cover away completely, and my breath caught in my throat. The carriage was a work of art, a relic of an age when craftsmanship was a form of worship. Its body was painted a deep midnight blue, adorned with gold leaf scrollwork that caught the light and transformed it into something almost magical. The wheels were tall and slender, their spokes intricately carved with patterns of leaves and vines, and the interior was upholstered in velvet the color of sapphires, now faded but still impossibly luxurious. And there on the door was a crest I recognized from history books and portraits, the royal arms of Queen Victoria herself. I stepped back, suddenly afraid to touch it. This was no ordinary carriage. This was a piece of history, a treasure that belonged in a museum or a palace, not in a forgotten carriage house on a crumbling estate. I found Mrs. Pemberton in the kitchen, overseeing the preparation of the evening meal. The air was thick with the scent of roasting meat and baking bread, and the cook, a stout woman named Mrs. Williams, was directing her assistants with the efficiency of a general commanding troops. "The blue carriage in the corner," I said, trying to keep my voice steady over the din. "The one with the royal crest. What is its history?" Mrs. Pemberton looked at me sharply, wiping her hands on her apron. "Why do you ask? It seems valuable. Too valuable to be stored in such conditions." Her expression softened slightly, though suspicion still lingered in her eyes. She gestured for me to follow her to a quieter corner of the kitchen, away from the bustle of meal preparation. "That carriage was a gift from Queen Victoria herself," she said, her voice low, "given to the old Duchess Edwina on the occasion of her service to the crown. Lady Edwina was a lady-in-waiting in her youth, very close to Her Majesty. The carriage was meant to honor that friendship. Then surely it cannot be sold." Mrs. Pemberton's mouth tightened. "His Grace has made his decision. The carriage will be sold with the others. A buyer has already been found. A collector from London who specializes in historical artifacts." My heart sank, though I could not explain why. It was not my place to question the Duke's decisions, not my place to mourn the loss of treasures that had never belonged to me. I returned to the carriage house the next morning, armed with cloths and brushes and a determination to restore the royal carriage to something approaching its former glory before it left Thornwood forever. The work was meditative, almost sacred. I polished the gilt trim until it gleamed beneath my fingers, watching the tarnish give way to brilliant gold. I brushed the velvet until the sapphire color deepened, revealing hues that had been hidden beneath decades of dust. I cleaned the glass windows until they were clear as still water, reflecting my own face back at me like a ghostly portrait. As I worked, I found myself speaking to the carriage as though it were a living thing. "You deserve better than this," I whispered, my cloth moving in gentle circles over the lacquered wood. "You deserve to be remembered." The carriage house was silent, save for the creak of old timbers settling and the distant call of crows in the oak trees. I felt as though I had stepped outside of time, into a space where the past and present merged, where the ghosts of those who had ridden in this magnificent vehicle still lingered in the velvet and gold. I thought about Lady Edwina, the old Duchess, who had loved these carriages so much. I wondered what kind of woman she had been, to earn such a gift from the Queen herself. I wondered what secrets she had carried, what joys and sorrows had accompanied her on her journeys through the English countryside. It was late afternoon, the light turning golden through the high windows, when I discovered the compartment. I had been cleaning beneath the seats, removing decades of accumulated dust and debris, when my fingers brushed against something unusual. A seam in the wood, so fine it was almost invisible, outlining a small rectangular panel beneath the velvet cushion. My heart began to pound. I pressed along the seam, searching for a mechanism, running my fingertips over the wood with the delicacy of a safecracker. For several long minutes I found nothing, and I began to wonder if I had imagined the seam entirely. Then, Near the edge of the panel, I felt a slight depression in the wood. I pressed it, and something clicked. The panel slid open, revealing a hollow space about the size of a hat box. Inside was a velvet pouch, heavy and solid, and beside it a bundle of papers tied with a faded blue ribbon. My hands trembled as I lifted the pouch. The velvet was old, but well preserved, a deep burgundy color that had darkened with age. I untied the silk cord that bound it and poured the contents into my palm. Jewels spilled out like frozen fire, diamonds the size of walnuts, their facets catching the light and scattering it into rainbow fragments. Rubies red as heart's blood, glowing with an inner fire that seemed almost alive. Emeralds green as summer leaves, deep and mysterious. There were necklaces of intricate design, their chains as delicate as spider silk. There were brooches set with gems I could not identify, stones of purple and orange and blue that sparkled with otherworldly beauty. There were rings sized for slender fingers, their settings heavy with precious metals. There was a tiara, its design a cascade of diamonds arranged like falling stars. And there was a bracelet set with sapphires that matched the carriage's velvet, each stone perfectly cut and polished. I could not breathe. I could not think. I could only stare at the fortune in my hands, a fortune that would make any person rich beyond imagining. For a long moment, I allowed myself to imagine what I could do with such wealth. I could leave Thornwood, leave England entirely. I could buy passage to America, where no one knew my name or my history. I could establish myself as a woman of means, could live out my days in comfort and security. The temptation was overwhelming, but even as I considered it, I knew I could not do it. These jewels were not mine. They had been hidden here by Lady Edwina for reasons I did not understand, and to take them would be to betray not only the Hartwell family, but also the woman who had trusted this hiding place to keep her secrets safe. It was the papers that truly changed everything. I set the jewels aside, returning them carefully to their velvet pouch, and untied the ribbon with shaking fingers. Inside were letters, dozens of them, written in an elegant feminine hand on paper that had yellowed with age. The ink had faded in places, but the words were still legible. The first letter was dated March 1845, nearly 40 years earlier. "My dearest Edward," it began, "I write to you knowing that this letter must never be sent, that these words must remain prisoners of my heart forever. But I cannot bear the silence any longer. I cannot bear the weight of what we have done, of what we have lost, of the choice that was made for us before we were old enough to understand its consequences." I read on, my eyes devouring the words like a starving woman devouring bread. The letters told a story of forbidden love between Lady Edwina, the young woman who would become Duchess of Ashworth, and a man named Edward Marlowe. He had been the son of a merchant, brilliant and kind and utterly beneath her station. They had met at a summer ball when she was 18, had fallen in love with the desperate intensity of youth, and had conceived a child together before her family discovered the affair and tore them apart. Edward was sent away, paid handsomely to forget her and never return. Edwina was married hastily to the old Duke, a man 30 years her senior who cared nothing for her heart and everything for her bloodline. The child, a son, was born 7 months after the wedding and claimed as the Duke's legitimate heir. That child was Sebastian's father. The letters continued through the years, a chronicle of longing and regret that spanned decades. Edwina had never stopped loving Edward, had written to him in secret even as she fulfilled her duties as Duchess, even as she bore the old Duke 2 more children who did not survive infancy, even as she watched her firstborn son grow into a man who carried Edward's eyes and Edward's temperament without ever knowing the truth. The old Duke knew, one letter confided. He suspected from the beginning, I think, but he could not prove it, and his pride would not allow him to admit that he had been cuckolded. So he punished me in other ways, in private cruelties that left no marks but scarred my soul. And he punished our son too, though the child had done nothing wrong, simply for existing, simply for reminding him of his own inadequacy. I read of stolen meetings in distant cities, brief hours of joy snatched from the suffocating confines of duty. I read of Edward's marriage to another woman, arranged by his family to cement a business alliance, and Edwina's quiet devastation when she learned of it. I read of the gradual fading of hope as the years stretched on and the possibility of reunion grew ever more remote. The jewels, the final letter explained, were gifts from Queen Victoria herself, given in recognition of Edwina's loyal service and discretion. The Queen had known about the affair, had helped conceal it to protect the crown's reputation, and had offered the jewels as both reward and compensation. "I have hidden them here," Edwina wrote, "because I cannot bear to wear them. They remind me of what I sacrificed, of the love I abandoned for duty, of the lies I told to protect a family that was never truly mine. Perhaps someday, someone will find them. Perhaps someday the truth will be told. But for now, they must sleep here in the dark, as my heart has slept for so many years." The final letter was dated just weeks before Lady Edwina's death, her handwriting shaky but still recognizable. "I am dying," she wrote. "The doctors do not say it, but I can feel it in my bones, in the way the light seems dimmer each day. I should destroy these letters, I know. I should burn them and let the truth die with me. But I cannot bring myself to do it. They are all I have left of him, of us, of the life we might have lived if fate had been kinder. Edward died 3 years ago. Did you know that? I read it in the Times, a small notice among many others. He was survived by his wife and 2 daughters. I did not weep. I had no tears left by then. But something in me went quiet, went still. The last ember of hope finally extinguished. Perhaps it is better this way. Perhaps some truths are not meant to be told. But I have written them down nonetheless, and hidden them where they will not be found until long after I am gone. Let whoever finds them judge me as they will. I have been judged by harsher courts. I sat in the carriage house for a long time after I finished reading, the jewels glittering beside me, the letters scattered across my lap like fallen leaves. I understood now why the carriage had been forgotten, why it had been hidden away in the darkest corner of the estate. Lady Edwina had buried her secrets here, had entombed her grief in velvet and gold leaf, and the fading memory of a love that society would never have permitted. And I, Helena Ashford, a maid of no consequence, had stumbled upon them all. The question of what to do consumed me for 3 days. I told no one what I had found. I returned the jewels and letters to their hiding place, replaced the panel, smoothed the velvet cushion until it betrayed nothing, and continued my cleaning as though nothing had changed. But everything had changed. I found myself unable to sleep, tossing and turning in my narrow bed while the moon traced its slow arc across the sky. I walked through my duties in a daze, polishing silver and beating carpets while my mind churned with possibilities and consequences. The buyer from London was scheduled to arrive at the end of the week. In 4 days, the carriage would be sold for £5, and with it, £30 million worth of jewels and a secret that could unravel the entire Hartwell legacy. I considered my options with the cold practicality that poverty teaches. I could say nothing, let the carriage be sold, and hope the new owner never discovered the compartment. The secret would disappear into history, and life would continue as before. It was the simplest path, the one that required nothing of me but silence. But what if the buyer found the compartment? What if the jewels resurfaced years from now, the discovery a scandal that touched everyone who had ever worked at Thornwood? I would know that I had failed to act, that I had let a fortune and a family's history slip away through my own cowardice. I could steal the jewels myself, flee in the night, and begin a new life somewhere far from England. No one would ever know. No one would ever suspect a lowly maid. The thought was intoxicating. I will not pretend otherwise. To never again worry about money, about security. about the next meal or the next position, to be free of the endless cycle of service that had defined my entire life. But the thought turned sour as quickly as it came. Those jewels were not mine to take. They belonged to Lady Edwina's memory, to the truth she had hidden for so many years, to the family whose entire history would be transformed by their discovery. And beyond the question of ownership, there was the simpler matter of who I wanted to be. I had been accused once of theft I did not commit. I would not now become the thief I had been falsely named. Or I could tell the Duke. The third option terrified me most of all. To speak to the Duke, to reveal what I had found, would be to insert myself into matters far above my station. It would draw attention to me, force me into the spotlight I had spent my life avoiding. It would require me to face the cold, distant master of Thornwood Hall and tell him that everything he knew about his family was a lie. But I knew, even as I weighed the alternatives, that it was the only choice I could live with. I requested an audience with the Duke through Mrs. Pemberton, who regarded me with naked astonishment. "An audience," she repeated, as though I had requested permission to fly to the moon. "You wish to speak with His Grace personally? It concerns the Carriages. There is something he must see." She studied me for a long moment, her pale eyes narrowing. I could see her mind working, cataloging possibilities, calculating risks. "Very well," she said at last. "I will convey your request. But do not expect a favorable response. His Grace does not trouble himself with servant matters." I waited in my room that evening, too anxious to eat, too restless to sleep. The candle on my nightstand had burned halfway down when a knock came at my door. It was Mr. Hughes, the butler, his expression as unreadable as always. "His Grace will see you now," he said. "Follow me." I had never entered the private wing of the house, where the family quarters occupied the entire second floor. The corridors here were wider, the carpets thicker, the portraits on the walls larger and more imposing. Generations of Hartwells gazed down at me as I passed, their eyes following me with what felt like judgment. The air smelled different here, of beeswax candles and old books and something faintly floral, perhaps the lingering ghost of a woman's perfume. The walls were hung with silk, the furniture carved from dark wood that gleamed with centuries of polish. The Duke's study was at the end of the hall, behind a heavy oak door that Mr. Hughes opened without knocking. The room beyond was warm with firelight and cluttered with books and papers. A massive desk dominated the center of the space, its surface covered with ledgers and correspondence. The walls were lined with shelves, and every shelf was crammed with volumes, some bound in leather, some in cloth, some so old their spines had crumbled to dust. The Duke sat behind the desk, his dark head bent over a ledger, and he did not look up as I entered. Mr. Hughes announced me and withdrew, closing the door behind him with a soft click. I stood in silence, waiting. Finally, the Duke raised his head. His eyes met mine, and I felt the impact like a physical blow. He looked tired, more tired than I had ever seen him, with shadows beneath his eyes and lines of tension around his mouth. His dark hair was disheveled, as though he had been running his hands through it, and his collar was loosened, his cravat discarded somewhere out of sight. "Miss Ashford," he said, "my housekeeper informs me you have something urgent to discuss regarding the Carriages." "Yes, Your Grace." He gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Sit." I sat, folding my hands in my lap to hide their trembling. He waited, his gray eyes fixed on my face with an intensity that made my skin warm. I took a deep breath and began. I told him about the royal carriage, about the compartment I had discovered beneath the seat, about the velvet pouch and its contents. I described the jewels as accurately as I could, their size, their quality, their probable value. I explained that I had left them where I found them, that I had touched nothing except to verify their existence. Through all of this, the Duke's expression did not change. He listened with the same cold attention he might give to a report on crop yields or tenant disputes, his face a mask of aristocratic control. Then I told him about the letters. His expression changed then. "Letters," he repeated, and his voice had gone very quiet. "Written by Lady Edwina, your grandmother. They are addressed to a man named Edward Marlowe." The Duke's face drained of color. I paused, suddenly uncertain. I had expected disbelief, perhaps, or dismissal. I had not expected this raw, naked shock. "The letters contain information of a personal nature, Your Grace. Information about your family's history. I thought you should know before the carriage is sold." He was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on something beyond me, beyond the walls of the study, beyond the present itself. I watched his hands clench into fists on the desk, watched the muscle in his jaw tighten. "Leave us," he said finally. I blinked. "Your Grace?" His eyes snapped back to mine, and I saw something raw and wounded in their depths. "Go to the carriage house. Wait for me there. I will come within the hour." "Yes, Your Grace." I rose and curtsied and left the study, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I did not know what I had set in motion. I did not know what truths would be uncovered, what pain would be inflicted, what lives would be changed. I only knew that I had told the truth, and that the truth, however painful, was the only foundation upon which anything real could be built. The Duke arrived at the carriage house as the clock in the main hall struck 11. I had lit several lanterns, and their golden light cast dancing shadows across the walls, across the shrouded carriages, across the royal blue velvet of Lady Edwina's treasure. He had changed from his evening clothes into riding attire, as though he planned to flee at any moment, and his face was pale as marble in the lamplight. His boots echoed on the stone floor as he walked toward me, and I could see the tension in his shoulders, the rigid control that kept him upright. "Show me," he said. I led him to the carriage and demonstrated how to open the hidden compartment. He watched in silence as the panel slid away, revealing the velvet pouch and the bundle of letters. He reached for the letters first. I stepped back, giving him privacy, but I could not bring myself to leave entirely. I stood near the door, watching as he untied the faded blue ribbon, as he unfolded the first letter, as his eyes moved across words that had been written 40 years before his birth. He read for a long time. The lanterns flickered and swayed, casting his shadow large against the wall. I watched his face change as he read, watched the mask of control slip away piece by piece. I saw confusion give way to understanding, understanding give way to grief, grief give way to something like rage. When he finally looked up, there were tears on his cheeks. I had never imagined the Duke of Ashworth capable of tears. I had thought him carved from the same cold stone as his ancestors, immune to the weaknesses of ordinary mortals. But here, in this forgotten carriage house, surrounded by the dust of decades and the ghosts of secrets, he wept like any man who has discovered that everything he believed about his life was a lie. "My father," he said, his voice rough and broken. "My father was not. He was not the Duke's son." I said nothing. There was nothing to say. "My grandmother loved another man, bore his child, married the Duke to hide her shame, and no one ever told me. No one ever." He pressed his hands to his face, and his shoulders shook with silent sobs. I moved without thinking, crossing the space between us, kneeling beside him on the dusty floor. I did not touch him, did not presume to offer comfort, but I remained close, a presence in the darkness. After a long while, his breathing steadied. "Why?" he asked, lowering his hands, his gray eyes finding mine in the lamplight. "Why did you tell me?" The question surprised me. "Because you deserved to know, Your Grace." The carriage was about to be sold. The jewels, the letters, everything would have been lost. You could have taken the jewels yourself. No one would have known. I shook my head. They are not mine to take." He studied me with an intensity that made my skin warm. "You are different from other servants. From other people. You speak as though you have a conscience. Everyone has a conscience, Your Grace. Some simply choose not to listen to it." A ghost of a smile touched his lips, there and gone in an instant. My grandmother chose not to listen. My father, whoever he truly was, chose not to listen. Even my mother, before she died, kept secrets that I am only now beginning to understand. He looked back at the letters in his hand. "She loved him," he said softly. "This Edward Marlowe. She loved him her entire life, even after they were separated, even after she married, even after she bore children to a man she did not choose. Is that not the greatest tragedy of all? To love someone completely and never be allowed to claim that love?" I thought of my own heart, guarded and careful, afraid to want things that were beyond my reach. "Perhaps," I said, "or perhaps the tragedy is not in loving, but in hiding. In living a life that is not your own, because society demands it." The Duke looked at me then with something like wonder. "You are wise, Miss Ashford. Wiser than most. I am practical, Your Grace. Wisdom is too grand a word for someone of my station." He shook his head. "Station is an accident of birth. Character is a choice. And you have chosen well tonight." I did not know how to respond to such praise, so I rose to my feet and busied myself with straightening the lanterns. "What will you do?" I asked. "With the jewels? With the letters?" "I do not know." He stood as well, tucking the letters into his coat. "The jewels must be assessed, their provenance verified. If they truly belong to Queen Victoria, the crown may have some claim to them. And the letters." He paused, his jaw tightening. "The letters will remain with me." I nodded. He moved toward the door, then stopped. "Miss Ashford?" "Yes, Your Grace. You have done me a great service tonight. I am in your debt." "You owe me nothing, Your Grace. I only did what was right." He turned to face me fully, and the lamplight caught his features, softening them, making him look younger and more vulnerable than I had ever seen him. "That is precisely why I am in your debt," he said. "In a world full of people who do what is expedient, you chose what was right. That is rarer than any jewel." He left then, disappearing into the darkness beyond the carriage house doors, and I remained alone with the ancient vehicles and the lingering scent of his presence. I did not know it then, but everything between us had changed. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity. The sale of the royal carriage was cancelled, the London collector informed by letter that the item was no longer available. Experts were summoned from the city to examine the jewels, arriving in a procession of hired carriages, their leather bags stuffed with magnifying glasses and scales and reference books. I watched from a distance as they spread the gems across a velvet cloth, their eyeglasses glinting as they catalogued each piece with reverent attention. They murmured to each other in hushed voices, pointing and measuring and making notes in tiny, precise handwriting. The jewels were authentic. More than authentic, they were priceless. The collection included pieces that had been missing from the royal inventory for decades, presumed lost or stolen after Queen Victoria's death. Their discovery at Thornwood Hall made headlines across England. Suddenly, the Duke of Ashworth was the subject of intense public interest. Reporters gathered at the estate gates, shouting questions at any servant who passed. Society matrons sent calling cards that went unanswered, their handwriting elaborate on cream-colored paper. Invitations to balls and dinners arrived by the dozen, filling a silver tray in the front hall that no one bothered to empty. Through all of this, the Duke remained as private as ever. He gave one brief statement to the press, acknowledging the discovery and expressing his intention to return the jewels to the crown, and then retreated behind the walls of Thornwood Hall as though nothing had changed. But something had changed. He began to seek me out. At first, It was small things. A question about the carriage house asked as we passed in the corridor. A request for my opinion on the arrangement of the main hall, delivered through Mrs. Pemberton with instructions that I should attend him in the library. A comment on the weather as I served his morning tea, breaking the customary silence between master and servant. Each interaction was brief, proper, entirely appropriate, but his eyes lingered on mine longer than they should have, and when he spoke to me, his voice held a warmth that had not been there before. Mrs. Pemberton noticed. "His Grace seems to have developed an interest in your work," she observed one evening, her tone carefully neutral. We were in her sitting room, reviewing the household accounts, and her pale eyes were fixed on me with uncomfortable intensity. "He has asked me twice this week about your duties and performance. I have done nothing improper, Mrs. Pemberton. I did not suggest you had. But be careful, Helena. Men of his station do not befriend women of ours without consequences." I understood her warning and did not resent it. She was protecting me in the only way she knew how, shielding me from a danger that had destroyed countless girls before me. But I could not make myself fear the Duke. I had seen him weep. I had watched him confront the truth of his family's history, had witnessed his grief and his confusion and his slow, painful acceptance. The cold, distant master of Thornwood Hall had revealed himself to be a man like any other, wounded and lonely and desperate for connection. And I, God help me, had begun to feel something for him that no maid should feel for her employer. The Christmas season arrived with frost and silence. The great hall was decorated with evergreen boughs and red ribbons, their scent filling the corridors with memories of forests and cold mornings. But there were no guests to admire them, no parties to fill the empty rooms with laughter and music. The other servants decorated out of habit, hanging garlands on banisters and placing candles in windows. But their movements were perfunctory, joyless. There had been no Christmas celebration at Thornwood since the old Duchess died, and none was expected now. The Duke dined alone in the great dining room, a solitary figure at the head of a table meant for 20. The empty chairs stretched before him like accusations, reminders of the family he did not have, the future he could not imagine. I had been assigned to serve him that evening, Mrs. Pemberton having come down with a cold that confined her to bed, and I stood against the wall with downcast eyes as he ate his meal in silence. The fire crackled in the massive hearth, the candles flickered in their silver holders. The only sounds were the clink of cutlery and the occasional sigh of the wind against the windows. "You may sit," he said suddenly, gesturing to the chair at his right. "I grow tired of speaking to the air." I hesitated. "It would not be proper, Your Grace." "Proper." He set down his fork, his expression almost amused. "Miss Ashford, I have spent my entire life being proper, doing what was expected, following rules that were written by people who cared nothing for my happiness or well-being. And where has it led me? To an empty house, an empty table, an empty life. Your Grace, I am asking you, as one human being to another, to sit with me, to share a meal, to remind me that I am not entirely alone in this world." The raw honesty in his voice undid me. I sat. The conversation that followed was unlike anything I had experienced. The Duke, Sebastian, as he asked me to call him in private, spoke of his childhood at Thornwood Hall, of a father who was cold and demanding, of a mother who was gentle but fragile, of the expectations that had been placed upon his shoulders before he was old enough to understand them. He told me about the years after his parents died, the crushing weight of debt, the creditors who circled like vultures, the slow, grinding effort to save an estate that had been mismanaged for generations. He spoke of sleepless nights spent poring over ledgers, of desperate negotiations with bankers, of the humiliation of selling heirlooms piece by piece to satisfy debts his father had accrued. And he told me about the letters. "I have been reading them," he said, his voice soft. "Every night, over and over. My grandmother's words to the man she loved. "Have they brought you peace?" He shook his head. "Not peace. Understanding, perhaps. I see now why my father was the way he was. He grew up knowing something was wrong, sensing that he did not belong, that the man who raised him looked at him with resentment rather than love. The old Duke knew, I think, knew the child was not his. And he punished my grandmother for it every day of their marriage. That is a terrible burden to carry." "It is." He looked at me, his gray eyes searching. "But knowing the truth has freed something in me. I am not bound by my father's legacy, not truly. The blood of Edward Marlowe runs in my veins. The blood of a merchant's son who loved a woman above his station and was punished for it. Does that change how you see yourself?" He considered the question. "It changes everything, and nothing. I am still the Duke of Ashworth. I still bear responsibilities to this estate, to the people who depend upon it. But I no longer feel obligated to become my father, to perpetuate his coldness, his isolation. I can choose differently. I can choose." He trailed off, his gaze dropping to his hands. "I can choose to live." The evening stretched into night, and still we talked. He asked about my life, my family, my hopes and dreams, and I found myself telling him things I had never told anyone. About my father's death, how the news had come at dawn, delivered by a man in a dripping coat who could not meet my mother's eyes. About the accusation that had cost me my previous position, the humiliation of being searched, the cold dismissal without reference. About the loneliness that came from being always on the margins, always watching but never belonging. He listened with an attention that felt like sunlight after years of shade. When the clock struck midnight, we both startled, suddenly aware of how much time had passed. "I should retire," I said, rising from my chair. "This has been—" I searched for words. "This has been unexpected." He rose as well, moving around the table to stand before me. His height seemed more pronounced in the intimate space, his presence more overwhelming. "Helena," he said, and my name on his lips was a revelation. "I know this is irregular. I know the world would condemn us both for what has happened tonight, for what I am about to say. But I find that I no longer care what the world thinks. My heart was beating so loudly I was certain he could hear it. You have awakened something in me that I thought was dead. Compassion. Hope. The belief that connection is possible, that I do not have to spend the rest of my life alone in this mausoleum of a house. Your Grace." "Sebastian," he corrected gently. "When we are alone, I am simply Sebastian." "Sebastian," I repeated, and the name felt dangerous on my tongue, like a spell that could not be unspoken. He reached out, slowly, giving me time to pull away, and his fingers brushed my cheek. The touch was electric, sending shivers down my spine. "I am not proposing anything improper," he said softly. "I am simply telling you that you have changed me, that knowing you has changed me. And I do not know what the future holds, but I know that I want you to be part of it." I closed my eyes, torn between longing and caution. "Society would never accept it," I whispered. "A duke and a maid. It is the stuff of fairy tales, not reality. Society accepted my grandmother's deception for 40 years. Society is a collection of people who enforce rules they themselves do not believe in. I am done living for society." He lowered his hand, stepping back. "I will not pressure you," he said. "I will not take advantage of the power I hold over you as your employer. If you wish to leave Thornwood, I will provide references and funds to establish yourself elsewhere. If you wish to stay and continue as before, nothing will change between us. But if you wish to explore what might be possible—" He left the sentence unfinished, an invitation hanging in the air. I opened my eyes and looked at him, this man who had been carved from ice and was slowly learning to feel again. "I will think on it," I said. "That is all I can promise." He nodded, and though disappointment flickered in his eyes, he did not argue. Good night, Helena. Good night, Sebastian. I left the dining room and climbed the stairs to the servants' quarters, my mind churning with thoughts that would not settle. I did not sleep that night. The weeks that followed were a study in restraint. The new year arrived with fresh snow and the peculiar silence that comes when the world is wrapped in white. I stood at my bedroom window on the first morning of January, watching the flakes drift down from a colorless sky, and wondered what the coming months would bring. The estate seemed different now, transformed by my knowledge of its secrets. Every corridor held echoes of Lady Edwina's hidden grief. Every portrait seemed to whisper questions about legitimacy and truth. The very stones of Thornwood Hall felt imbued with decades of concealment. I went about my duties as before, but my mind was elsewhere. In the carriage house, where the royal carriage still sat beneath its canvas cover, waiting for a fate that had been postponed indefinitely. In the library, where Sebastian spent his evenings reading his grandmother's letters over and over, searching for answers to questions that had no resolution. In the uncertain space between what society demanded and what my heart desired. Clara noticed my distraction. She found me one afternoon standing motionless in the upstairs corridor, a stack of linens forgotten in my arms, staring at nothing. "Helena," she said, waving a hand before my eyes. "Where have you gone?" I blinked, returning to myself. Nowhere. I was just thinking. You have been just thinking for weeks now, ever since you spent that evening with His Grace. She lowered her voice, glancing around to ensure we were alone. What happened between you? Nothing improper. I did not say improper. I said what happened. There is a difference. I could not tell her the truth, not all of it. The secret of the jewels and letters was not mine to share. But I could acknowledge the simpler truth, the one that showed in my face whenever Sebastian's name was mentioned. I care for him, I admitted, more than I should. Clara's eyes widened. Oh, Helena, I know, it is foolish, impossible. But feelings do not obey logic. She took the linens from my arms and set them aside, then drew me into a small alcove where we could speak without being overheard. You must be careful, she said, her voice urgent. Men like him, they have dalliances with women like us. It is sport to them, a way to pass the time. But when it is over, we are the ones who pay the price. He is not like that. They are all like that, in the end. She gripped my hands tightly. I speak from experience, Helena. Before I came to Thornwood, I worked in a house in London. The master's son, he was kind to me too, paid me attention, made me feel special. And when his father discovered us, who do you think was dismissed without a reference? I am sorry. I am not telling you this for sympathy. I am telling you so you understand what is at stake. Your position, your reputation, your future. All of it, gone in an instant, because you allowed yourself to feel. I heard the pain beneath her warning, the old wound that had never fully healed. Thank you, I said, for caring enough to warn me. Promise me you will be careful. I promise. But even as I spoke the words, I knew I could not keep them, not entirely. Not when every fiber of my being strained toward Sebastian like a flower toward the sun. Sebastian kept his word. He did not pursue me, did not pressure me, did not behave in any way that could be construed as improper. When we passed in the corridors, he nodded politely. When I served at table, he thanked me with the same courtesy he showed the other servants. To an outside observer, nothing had changed, but I felt his awareness of me like a physical presence. I caught his eyes following me across rooms. I heard the slight catch in his breath when our hands accidentally touched. The air between us was charged with unspoken possibility, and I was tormented. My rational mind catalogued all the reasons why I should forget that Christmas evening. All the obstacles that stood between a maid and a duke. The scandal that would erupt if our connection became known. The damage to his reputation, already fragile from the jewel discovery. The likelihood that his interest was temporary, a fixation born of loneliness that would fade once the novelty wore off. But my heart, my treacherous heart, remembered the way he had looked at me, the way he had spoken to me, the way he had asked to be called simply Sebastian, as though titles and stations were illusions we might choose to see through. It was Mrs. Pemberton who forced my hand. She summoned me to her sitting room in late January, her expression grave. "I have been watching you," she said without preamble, "and I have been watching His Grace." My throat tightened. "Do not insult me by denying it," she continued. "I have managed this household for 20 years. I know when something is amiss." I said nothing. She sighed, and for the first time, I saw something like sympathy in her eyes. "I am not going to dismiss you," she said. "You have done nothing wrong, not technically. But I must ask you to consider your position. I am aware of my position, Mrs. Pemberton. Are you?" She leaned forward. "His Grace is a good man, better than his father was, better than most nobles I have served. But good men are still bound by the rules of their world. He may care for you now, in the privacy of this house. But when the time comes to choose between you and his duty, between affection and reputation, he will choose duty. They always do." Her words struck deep, echoing fears I had been trying to suppress. "What would you have me do?" She was silent for a long moment. "I would have you protect yourself," she said finally. "I would have you remember that fairy tales are for children, and that women like us must live in the real world." I left her sitting room with her warnings ringing in my ears. That evening, I made a decision. I would speak to Sebastian. I would lay out the impossibilities that stood between us. I would give him the chance to release me from whatever spell we had woven together. And then I would leave Thornwood Hall before my heart shattered beyond repair. I found him in the library, seated in his customary chair by the fire, a book open in his lap. The flames cast dancing shadows across his face, and his hair gleamed dark in the light. He looked up when I entered, and his face transformed with something like joy before he schooled it back into composure. "Helena, is something wrong?" I closed the door behind me and crossed the room to stand before him. "We must speak," I said, "about what happened at Christmas, about what has been happening since." He set the book aside and rose to his feet. "I was afraid of this," he said quietly. "You have decided to leave. I have decided to be honest." I lifted my chin, meeting his gaze. "I care for you, Sebastian, more than I should, more than is wise or proper or safe. But caring is not enough to bridge the distance between us." "What distance?" He stepped closer. "We are both human. We both feel. We both long for connection that goes beyond the roles society has assigned us. You are a duke. I am a maid. When you marry, it must be to a woman of breeding, a woman who can bear you legitimate heirs, a woman who will not bring scandal upon your name." His jaw tightened. "I have no intention of marrying for convenience. Then you will remain alone forever, because no noblewoman will accept a husband whose heart belongs to a servant." The word hung between us, ugly and honest. He was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "And if I told you," he said at last, "that I would rather remain alone forever than marry without love, I would say you are young and idealistic and have not yet felt the weight of years. I am 32 years old. I have felt nothing but weight since my father died. Until you, Sebastian." He reached out and took my hands in his. His grip was warm and steady. "I have spent weeks thinking about this," he said, examining it from every angle, consulting solicitors about the legal implications, speaking with the one friend I trust, a man who knew my grandmother, who confirmed the truth of the letters. What truth? That my grandmother's marriage to the old duke was never properly consummated. That my father, despite bearing the Hartwell name, had no legal claim to the title or the estate. That the entire line of succession has been based on a lie. I stared at him, uncomprehending. He smiled, a sad, strange smile. I am not the Duke of Ashworth, Helena. Not legitimately. The moment the truth of those letters becomes public, I will lose everything. The title, the estate, the position in society that you believe makes me untouchable. But the jewels, our crown property. The Queen's representatives have already informed me that while I will receive a finder's fee for their recovery, they will be returned to the royal collection. Then you will be ruined, impoverished, a scandal and a pariah. He laughed, and there was genuine amusement in the sound. And do you know what I feel, contemplating this fate? I shook my head. Relief. For the first time in my life, I feel free. The chains that have bound me since birth are about to be broken, and I find that I do not mourn them. He squeezed my hands. The world you fear, the world of titles and expectations and rigid hierarchies, is about to crumble around me. And when the dust settles, I will be no better than any common man, no higher in station than you yourself. His eyes were bright, feverish almost. Marry me, Helena. The words struck me like a thunderbolt. What? Marry me. Not as a duke marries a servant, but as a man marries a woman. We will build something new together, something honest. I will work. I will earn. I will prove myself worthy of you not through inherited wealth, but through the strength of my own hands. You are mad. Perhaps. He raised my hands to his lips and kissed them, a gesture so tender it brought tears to my eyes. But I have never been more certain of anything in my life. You showed me that truth is more valuable than pretense. That integrity matters more than status. You changed me, Helena. Let me spend the rest of my life being worthy of that change. I wanted to refuse. Every practical instinct I possessed screamed that this was folly, that he would regret his words once the reality of poverty set in, that I was not worth the sacrifice he was proposing. But when I looked into his eyes, I saw no hesitation, no doubt, only love, clear and unwavering. Yes, I said, and the word felt like a door opening onto a new world. Yes, I will marry you. He kissed me then, there in the library of Thornwood Hall, with the fire crackling and the snow falling beyond the windows. It was a kiss that tasted of hope and beginning, of promises kept and walls broken down. And I knew in that moment that whatever came next, we would face it together. The scandal broke in February. A reporter from London, investigating the discovery of the royal jewels, had dug into the Hartwell family history and unearthed the truth of the letters. His article, published on the front page of a major newspaper, revealed that the current Duke of Ashworth was descended from an illegitimate line, that the title had been held under false pretenses for 3 generations. I remember the morning the news arrived. Sebastian and I had just finished breakfast together, a small rebellion against propriety that had become our daily ritual. The butler, Mr. Hughes, entered with a silver tray bearing the Morning Post, and among the letters was a newspaper, folded to reveal a damning headline. Sebastian read it in silence. His face did not change, but I saw his knuckles whiten where he gripped the paper. "It has begun," he said quietly. The reaction was immediate and brutal. Society turned its back on Sebastian with breathtaking speed. Within days, invitations that had been extended were rescinded with flimsy excuses. Acquaintances who had once sought his favor cut him dead in the street. Business partners dissolved their agreements, citing concerns about reputation and stability. The letters arrived in floods. Some were sympathetic, expressing quiet support from those who valued Sebastian for himself rather than his title. But many more were cruel, dripping with sanctimony and schadenfreude. Anonymous notes accused him of everything from fraud to treason. Former friends wrote to explain why they could no longer associate with a man of such dubious lineage. I found Sebastian burning a pile of these letters one evening, feeding them to the fire one by one. "You should not read them," I said, kneeling beside him. "I know. But I cannot help wondering which of these people I once called friends wrote to gloat at my downfall. Does it matter?" He considered the question, watching the flames consume another sheet of expensive paper. "No," he said at last. "I suppose it does not." The estate, already burdened with debt, faced foreclosure as creditors demanded immediate repayment. Bankers who had once extended patience now insisted on their pound of flesh. Solicitors arrived with documents that required signatures, transferring ownership of lands that had been in the family, or what had been thought of as the family, for generations. I watched Sebastian sign away his birthright with steady hands. If he felt grief at the loss, he did not show it. Through all of this, Sebastian remained calm. We had expected this. We had prepared for it. In the weeks before the scandal broke, he had quietly sold several valuable paintings, liquidated investments, and secured funds that would sustain us through the transition. Thornwood Hall would be lost, but we would not be destitute. The servants, those who had served the Hartwell family for years, faced an uncertain future. Sebastian gathered them in the great hall to deliver the news himself. I watched from the doorway as he stood before them, no longer their master in any legal sense, but still commanding their attention with quiet authority. "I will not pretend that what is happening is anything other than a tragedy," he said. "Many of you have given years of your lives to this house. You deserved better than this." A murmur ran through the assembled staff. Mrs. Pemberton stood rigid, her face betraying nothing, but I saw the sheen of tears in Clara's eyes. "I have written references for each of you," Sebastian continued. "Glowing ones, regardless of whether they are entirely deserved." He allowed himself a small smile. "Those of you who wish to remain until the new owners take possession will receive full wages for that period. Those who wish to seek new positions immediately will receive 3 months' wages as severance." The generosity of the offer rippled through the crowd. Such consideration was rare among employers of any station. "I am sorry," Sebastian concluded, "for all of it. You deserved a better master than one whose entire existence was built upon a lie." He turned and walked away, and I followed, leaving the servants to absorb the news in their own way. In the corridor, away from watching eyes, Sebastian's composure finally cracked. He pressed his hand against the wall and bowed his head, and I saw his shoulders shake with silent emotion. I went to him, wrapped my arms around his back, and held him as he mourned the only life he had ever known. The day we left the estate was gray and cold, the sky heavy with clouds that promised more snow. I stood at the front entrance, a small bag in my hand, watching Sebastian bid farewell to the servants who had chosen to remain until the new owners took possession. Mrs. Pemberton was among them. She approached me as Sebastian spoke with Mr. Hughes, her expression complex. "I misjudged you," she said. "Both of you. You were protecting me. I cannot fault you for that." She shook her head. "I was protecting you from a fairy tale that I believed could not exist. But it seems I was wrong." She glanced at Sebastian, then back at me. He looks happier than I have ever seen him. Lighter, as though a weight has been lifted. The weight of expectation, the weight of pretense. She took my hands in hers, a gesture so uncharacteristic that I nearly gasped. "Be happy, Helena. You deserve it." I embraced her, this stern woman who had taught me the rhythms of Thornwood Hall. And when I pulled away, there were tears in her eyes. We traveled north, to a small village in Yorkshire, where Sebastian had purchased a modest house with the last of his funds. It was nothing like Thornwood Hall, this cottage of gray stone with its low ceilings and creaking stairs. But it was ours, bought with honest money, free from the shadows of the past. Our wedding took place in March, in the village church with a handful of witnesses. I wore a simple dress of cream-colored muslin, and Sebastian wore a suit that had seen better days, and when the vicar pronounced us man and wife, I felt a joy so profound it nearly brought me to my knees. "We are nobody now," Sebastian whispered as we walked out into the spring sunshine. A man and his wife, with no title and no fortune, and nothing but each other. That is everything, I replied. That is more than enough. The years that followed were not easy. Sebastian found work as a clerk in a solicitor's office, his education and intelligence making him valuable despite his lack of formal qualifications. The other clerks regarded him with curiosity at first, this fallen aristocrat who arrived each morning in a worn coat and sat at a desk no different from their own. But Sebastian's willingness to work, to learn, to treat his colleagues as equals, soon won their respect. He would come home in the evenings smelling of ink and lamp oil, his fingers stained from hours of copying documents. I would have tea waiting for him, the small cottage warm from the fire I had tended throughout the day, and we would sit together and talk about nothing and everything. I took in sewing, using skills my mother had taught me, and slowly we built a clientele among the village women who appreciated my careful stitches and reasonable prices. I mended dresses and let out seams and created simple garments for those who could not afford the dressmaker in the larger town nearby. The work was humble, so different from the polished duties of a lady's maid, but there was satisfaction in it. Each garment I completed was a small victory, a tangible proof that I could contribute to our household, that I was not merely a dependent, but a partner. We faced hardships. There were winters when the cold crept into our bones and the cupboards grew bare, when we rationed coal and went to bed hungry. I remember one December when Sebastian sold his pocket watch, the only remnant of his former life that he had kept, to pay for medicine when I fell ill with a fever that would not break. I wept when I discovered what he had done. It was only a thing, he said, holding me close. You are not a thing. You are my heart. And I would sell everything I own, 1,000 times over, to keep you safe. There were summers when illness struck and we feared the worst, when the doctor shook his head and prescribed rest we could not afford. There were moments of doubt, of wondering whether we had made the right choice, whether love was truly enough to sustain us when the rent was due and the pantry was empty. One night, in the depths of our second winter in Yorkshire, I found Sebastian sitting by the dying fire, his head in his hands. We could go back, I said quietly. You could contest the ruling, claim your inheritance. The jewels you returned must be worth enough to hire a dozen solicitors. He looked up at me, and in the firelight his face was hollow with exhaustion. Is that what you want? He asked. I want you to be happy. He smiled, a tired but genuine smile. I am happy, Helena. For the first time in my life, I am truly happy. Not because of what I have, but because of who I am. He reached for my hand. When I was a duke, I was playing a role that had been written for me before I was born. Every word I spoke, every action I took, was dictated by expectation and tradition. I was never allowed to simply be. And now? Now I am Sebastian. Just Sebastian, a man who works hard, who loves his wife, who has earned every small comfort in his life through his own effort. He squeezed my fingers. I would not trade this for 100 estates. But it is so difficult, I said, the words catching in my throat. Watching you struggle, knowing what you gave up for me. Not for you, he corrected gently. For us, for the life we are building together. He pulled me down to sit beside him, wrapping his arm around my shoulders. And it will not always be this hard. We are strong, Helena. We are resourceful. We will find our way. I leaned into him, drawing comfort from his warmth, from his certainty. I believe you, I whispered. And I did. Despite everything, I believed. But always we faced them together. And in those moments when the weight of the world pressed too heavily, Sebastian would take my hands and look into my eyes and say, You changed me. You saved me. And I would remember that day in the Carriage house, when I chose to tell the truth instead of taking the easy path. The truth had cost us everything society valued, but it had given us something far more precious. 5 years after our wedding, a letter arrived that would change our circumstances once more. It was from the Crown, signed by a secretary whose name I did not recognize. The finder's fee for the royal jewels, which had been delayed by bureaucratic complications, had finally been processed. The amount was substantial, enough to purchase a comfortable home, to secure our future, to give us options we had never dared to dream. Sebastian read the letter twice, then handed it to me without a word. "It seems fate has one more surprise for us," he said, his voice thick with emotion. I read the figure at the bottom of the page and felt my knees weaken. Sebastian. He caught me, held me close. "We were rich once, and we lost everything," he murmured into my hair. "We were poor, and we found happiness. Now we have been given a second chance. What shall we do with it?" He pulled back to look at me, and his gray eyes, those winter storm eyes that I had learned to read like a book, were warm with possibility. "Whatever we wish. We are free, Helena. Truly free. We used the money wisely. We purchased a larger house, not grand but comfortable, with room for the library Sebastian had always wanted. We invested in businesses that provided steady income. We gave generously to those in need, remembering all too well what it felt like to wonder where the next meal would come from. And we loved each other with a devotion that only deepened with time. Sometimes, in the quiet evenings, Sebastian would take out the letters that his grandmother had written so many years ago. He had kept them all, these testaments to a love that had been denied. "She would be glad, I think," he said one night, tracing the faded script with his finger. "To know that her secrets led to something good. Her secrets led you to the truth," I replied. "And the truth led you to me." He looked up and his smile was radiant. "The best trade I ever made," he said. "A carriage, £5, and everything I thought I wanted. All exchanged for everything I truly needed." I leaned into him, feeling his warmth, his solidity, his unwavering presence. "We are unlikely," I said. "A duke and a maid. A man and his wife," he corrected. "That is all we are, all we need to be." Outside, the Yorkshire wind sang against the windows, and inside, the fire crackled with warmth and light. I thought of the girl I had been, standing at the servants' entrance of Thornwood Hall with a small bag and a bruised reputation. I thought of the secrets I had uncovered, the choices I had made, the love I had never expected to find. And I knew that if I could speak to that girl, I would tell her only this: trust yourself. Tell the truth. Let love find you. The rest, all of it, would follow, as it had, as it would continue to do, for all the years that remained to us. On the anniversary of our first meeting, each year without fail, Sebastian would present me with a single white rose, a tradition he began the first year of our marriage. The rose, he explained, represented the purity of his intentions that night in the library, when he had confessed his feelings and asked nothing in return but my honest consideration. "I still remember your face," he told me on our 10th anniversary, as we sat in the garden of our Yorkshire home, watching the sun set over the moors. "You were terrified. Not of me, I think, but of the possibility." "I was terrified of hope," I admitted. Hope had disappointed me so many times before. My father's death, the false accusation, the years of struggling. I had learned to expect nothing good because expecting led to pain. And now? Now I expect everything good. Because you have taught me that hope is not foolishness. It is courage. He brought my hand to his lips, as he had done so many times before. "You taught me the same," he said. "You taught me that truth, even when it destroys what we have built, can be the foundation for something better." We sat in comfortable silence, the kind of silence that only those who truly know each other can share. Around us, the garden bloomed with the flowers I had planted, roses and lilies and lavender, a riot of color that softened the gray stone of the house. I have been thinking, Sebastian said at last, about the carriage house. The carriage house had been demolished years ago, along with much of Thornwood Hall. The new owners, a manufacturing family from Birmingham, had modernized the estate beyond recognition. What about it? I never thanked it properly. For hiding those jewels all those years. For waiting until you came along to reveal them. I laughed. You wish to thank a building? I wish to thank fate, destiny, God. Whatever force brought you to Thornwood Hall at precisely the right moment. If you had arrived a week later, the carriage would have been sold. If you had been less diligent, you might never have found the compartment. If you had been less honest, you might have kept the jewels for yourself. But I did not. No. He turned to face me, his gray eyes soft with love. You did not. And that single choice, that moment of integrity changed everything. I thought about the path my life had taken, the unlikely sequence of events that had led me from a cramped servant's room to this comfortable home, from loneliness to love. Do you ever regret it? I asked. Giving up Thornwood? The title? He considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. I regret the pain it caused others, he said slowly. The servants who lost their positions. The tenants who faced uncertainty. But for myself? No. I cannot regret becoming the man I am today. And I could not have become this man while carrying the weight of that inheritance. He smiled, and it was the smile I had fallen in love with, warm and unguarded. Besides, he added, if I were still the Duke of Ashworth, I could never have married you. And a life without you is not a life worth living. I leaned into him, feeling his arm come around my shoulders. We are old now, I said. Or getting there. Old and happy. Is there a better combination? I thought about it. Old, happy, and together, I decided. That is the best combination of all. He kissed my forehead. Then we have achieved it. The best life possible. And we had. The story of the royal jewels faded from public memory, as all stories eventually do. Newer scandals replaced it. Fresher gossip demanded attention. And the tale of the Duke who gave up everything for love became a footnote in the chronicles of Victorian society. But for us, it remained everything. Every morning when I woke beside Sebastian, I remembered. Every evening when we dined together, I remembered. Every moment of joy and sorrow and love, I remembered the choice I had made in that dusty carriage house, the choice to tell the truth even when silence would have been easier. I had been born to kneel, but I had risen. Not because of jewels or money or the favor of the powerful, but because I had remained true to myself when every temptation urged me to betray my values. That is the greatest treasure of all. Not the diamonds and rubies hidden beneath the velvet seat, not the fortune they represented, but the knowledge that integrity, even when it costs everything, rewards us with something money cannot buy: peace, self-respect, the ability to look in the mirror and see someone worthy of love. Sebastian and I found all of these things in each other. We built a life that was not grand, but was good. We loved deeply and argued fiercely and forgave freely. We grew old together, as we had promised, and when the end approached, as it must for all of us, we faced it without fear. Because we had lived, truly lived. And no jewel in any royal collection could compare to that. In the winter of our final year together, when the snow lay thick upon the Yorkshire moors and the fire burned low in the hearth, Sebastian took my hand and spoke the words that would stay with me beyond the grave. I have loved you, he said, every day since the moment you chose truth over safety. I have loved you in poverty and in comfort. I have loved you in youth and in age, and I will love you still, whatever comes next, in whatever form existence takes beyond this life. I squeezed his hand, feeling the bones beneath the thin skin, the fragility that time brings to all of us. And I have loved you, I replied. The cold Duke who learned to feel. The broken man who chose to heal. the partner who walked beside me through every storm. He smiled, and it was the same smile I had first seen in the firelight of Thornwood's library, all those decades ago. "Then we have been blessed," he said, "beyond measure. We were. And in the end, that blessing was all that mattered. The jewels are gone now, returned to their rightful place in the royal collection. The letters have been donated to a museum, where scholars study them and marvel at the secrets they contain. But the love remains. In the flowers that bloom each spring in the garden I planted. In the books that line the library Sebastian built. In the memories that echo through the rooms of our little house, the laughter and the tears and the whispered conversations in the dark. In the story I have told you, which is the only treasure I have left to give. Take it, dear reader. Take it and remember that a maid once found a fortune and gave it away for love. That a duke once lost everything and gained the world. That truth, however painful, is always better than lies. And that love, true love, is worth more than 30 million pounds. It is worth more than all the jewels in all the kingdoms of the earth. It is worth everything. Remember this. And when your moment comes, when fate offers you a choice between safety and truth, between duty and love, between the life you were given and the life you could have, remember, Helena Ashford. Remember what I chose. And choose well. Your life depends upon it. Your happiness depends upon it. Your very soul depends upon it. Choose truth. Choose love. Choose yourself. And let the rest fall away, like dust from an old carriage seat, revealing the treasure that was always there, waiting to be found. This is my story, and now it is yours. Do with it what you will. But remember, always remember, the greatest discoveries are not the jewels we find. They are the truths we choose to tell, and the love we are brave enough to claim. That is all. That is everything. That is enough. Farewell, dear reader, and may your carriage carry you to places beyond your wildest dreams. As mine did. As mine did. I was born to kneel, to scrub, to disappear into the walls of grand houses that would never bear my name. But I found my way to something greater. I found truth in a hidden compartment. I found love in the eyes of a man who had forgotten how to feel. I found myself in the choice to speak when silence would have been safer. The carriage sold for £5, but what it gave us was priceless. And I would not trade a single moment of my unlikely, improbable, beautiful life for all the jewels in all the world. This is the end of my tale, but it is not the end of love. Love never ends. It simply changes form, passing from hand to hand, heart to heart, generation to generation. And if you have heard my story, if you have taken it into yourself, then some part of me lives on in you, as some part of Sebastian lives on, as some part of Lady Edwina, who hid her secrets and her heartbreak in a royal carriage, hoping someone would find them and understand. We are all connected, dear reader, by the stories we tell, by the truths we choose to share, by the love we dare to claim. Remember this, and be brave. The end.